Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Menachos daf Ayin. We're going to begin on the very last line on Samach Tes Amid Beis. So we've been asking a series of questions, and now we continue. Boy Rabbi, so he asked the following question: Inyan Meiser Mai. What is the din when it comes to Meiser? So we were asking before this in yesterday's daf whether or not we go after the ikar, the main growth, or the fact that there's some regrowth when it's replanted. So what's the din when it comes to meiser? So hey, we keep going as we continue to Ayin Amud Aleph. Let's say the dinhu that you already evaluated, v'asrinhu, and therefore you already separated and took off the proper meiser. However, v'shas linhu, and then you replanted it afterwards, vosifulahu, and it ended up growing a little bit more. So in that situation, says Rashi, shikatzer shiboylin harbe, v'doshen el yisurin, v'shas slam oisin shalchulin. So imtim slam chomra dolazin basar ikr. Let's say we want to go strict, and we are not going to go after the majority of the growth, and the fact that you already took off meiser, so therefore, if you go basar ikr, so you would think it would passer the toisefes. So we're saying no, maybe not. What do we do when it comes to this? Maybe the din is the fact that it grew extra, that now there's a chiv to take meiser on that. So imtim soleimer lozdim basar ikr, then we don't go basar the ikr growth. And the fact that you replanted and it grew it a little bit, v'toisefes bo yisuri, and therefore the extra amount also, it's necessary for us to take meiser off of that. So, ikr mai. What if we're dealing with the primary stalk? Then what is the din? So, understand? How is this any different than any wheat or barley in the world? It says Rashi, even though it's true, let's say by wheat and barley, let's say you did take off the proper meiser, ki hadar zaralhu, when you replant it, boyasuri, hanami boyasuri. Understand, if you're replanting it and there's more growth, of course you have to take off meiser. So why would you make any distinction here that you would maybe not have to? Of course you would have to take it off again. So what exactly is the question? So Malay, davar shazar kal maboili. If we're dealing something in which basically disintegrates into the ground, for example, wheat and barley, says Rashi, shazar kaleh, that the stalk disintegrates, so it's kol b'karka, misachel v'yoytze zera yerek v'ubaz zera acher lo b'boyle devadi boy asuri the choldahu achrini ninhu. The fact that there's nothing, the stalk doesn't exist. So now that there's some new growth, so then you definitely have to take off meiser. However, el ki kimaboili, the question is davar she'en zor kala. Let's say you're dealing with a stock that remains intact. My. So in that situation, Rashi says kagain hach shiboilis sheshaslu ein ha'ikr misachel. The main part doesn't disappear. El hayachol meisif mai. So what's the din here? Since the ikr is still there, so therefore maybe we should just say, well, we go basar ikr. Maybe we don't go basar ikr when it's shazar kol, like wheat and barley, but not necessarily when it comes to einzar kol. So tivshalom miha. D'yamir Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Rabbi Yochanan litra batzel. Let's say a person has a certain measurement of onion, shetiknu, that they separated the meiser, and then they replanted it. The zaro. So misaser lefi kuloi. So you have to take meiser lefi kuloi. So which means, says Rashi, sarachal iser laser aflitter rishayna. Alma, what do we see? Says Rashi, hadar boy asuri. The fact you have to redo it, you have to get in zar kaleh, even though an onion is something in which it sticks around. We know the exact amount. So we see that you do have to take off the meiser. So it's a raya that you do. Whereas it says hasam hainu zuriyasai, hachal of hainu zuriyasai. So we say it's not necessarily a raya. Over there, that's how you plant it with the onions. So maybe that's the normal way. So therefore, the din is that you're going to be chayav to take off meiser. But if, let's say, this is not the normal way of planting, that it's not we're not talking about onions, but something else. But nonetheless, when you do plant it, it is she'en zarakala. So there, we're not sure what the answers. Amr Chanina bar min Yomi labai otzet shedo nokav. Let's say you have a pot which is not perforated, and therefore it doesn't really get its nutrients straight from the ground. Mahu, what's the din when it comes to that? So Rashi says, "V'kapayre chashas I lo nokuv ha lo nokuv v'shaper." So Taram demina patur al paturhu. So the question is, I lo nokuv ha nokuv. So if, let's say, this one's there's not perforated, there's no hole in it, right? So then what's the shaila? So dilma chazim and nakva ka'amr. In other words, let's say if there's no hole, so then there's no chiva meiser. But let's say you originally planted it in a pot which does not have a hole, and then afterwards it later got a hole. So some of it grew without the hole, and then some of it grew with the hole, which is now connected to the ground. So hachachad zriyahi. This one over here is one planting. Echburi hudika michbura v'oila. We say that the roots are all attached and go up. Hasam shtei zriyos dinhu. And the other one is two plantings. So look at Rashi. Dilma b'nichusa, as a proof. Chaz v'nakvu ka'amrit. Again, that you had a hole in it. The hakim in boilan. Atzit shenu nakuv. Let's say you have a pot with no hole. V'gadla hatvua b'miksa. Some of it grew. V'achach nakvu. Then there was a hole in it. Mahu. Well, asuri minei. Do you have to take off meiser? V'imtim solaymer lo azlein basa ikar. Unless you don't go after the majority of the growth. And there was toisefesh shegadol achar nekiva. And even the ikar grew when it was a non-perforated pot. Then you put a hole in it and it grew a little bit more. So if we don't go baser ikar, so boy is suri, in that case you have to take off meiser. So that's the question. So Rashi says chadaz rehi va'achshav kishinakvo. When you put a hole in it, he mitchilas l'shtarish avogabi boy de Rava. Rava's question is shtei zriyos, two plantings. Hein de shiboilas. In other words, you planted it, and then you took off the meiser, and then you replanted it. Hilkach israchle limeboy. You have to ask the kasha ihader mechayvile toisefes l'ikar l'mahadir surya lo. So in other words, there are two separate cases. The first case we mentioned is that there's two plantings. Over here, it's the same planting. All you did was put a hole in the pot. That's the only distinction. Okay, so that is what we end up saying. So boy Ravavoy. So now Ravavoy poses another kasha. Let's say the shiboilis. So you have these grains of stalk, mircha bekri, that got smoothed out in a pile, which makes it chayv and meiser. And then v'shasla, you replant the v'karla Hashem, and it's given the name of truma. The mechuber sumahu kivan the marcha. Once you smooth it out, so tavla law, it's considered to be tevel. Ki karla Hashem kachula. So therefore, when you call it truma, it's considered to be kodesh. Well, kivan the shasla, since you replanted it, pakale tavla mine, it no longer is tevel. So we find that there's such a thing that truma could exist even though it's still attached to the ground. But Tanan, we said before that lo matzinu truma mechumel karka. Right? We never find this. So when would they say this, that we never find truma attached to the ground, is only when it comes to bichayv misa and chaimish. If you detach and eat it, tolishu, it's considered to be detached. V'gachin v'achel, if you bend down and eat it, batal daita, it's a kol adam. That's not the normal way a person eats. It says Rashi kishahayis mechuberes, while it's attached, batal daita, it's a kol adam. V'lo yahav yechila, that doesn't count as eating. So Maishna Midikasiv Pinkasa. How is this any different? That a person who wrote on a ledger, the Ilfa Beitzi, Nevelos Ha'oif, Hatahar, Miksasim Mechutzim, Miksasim Ifnim. So let's say you have a Nevelos Oif Tahar, that part of it is outside, part of it's inside. Says Rashi, so you have eggs that are attached to the hen. Some of it's out of the animal. That which is inside still is, as we said, is going to be matama baganama besabliya because it's attached to the bird. It says the Gemara in Beya, ha'oichel nevelos oif tahar. When a person eats from the nevel of an oif tahar, we established that it was detached and he ate it. Ava achlinu hagavoy hachinami the matamu alma. So Grant's is Tolish, the fact that it's detached of it inish the achli hachi. Some people will eat it in this way. But of it inchi the achli, once attached, no one does. Therefore we say batal data it's a koladam. Amram tiv Yomi bar kisna Mishmul hazura kilam be'atzisheno nok. If a person plants kilayim into a pit, which into a pot which is not perforated, aser. He still says that the din is aser. Aser. Amr Rabbi Bishlam Yashminan like Makas Mardis Midrabanan Shabrel aser my kamashmon the Midrabanan Havizriya. Midraban's like planting Tanita Tarim Mishenu Nokaval Hanokav Truma Vyaksar Vyatroim. Okay. Alright, so let's look at question TA 19. How do we find that truma could still be attached to the ground? How do we explain when it says that we never find truma b'mechuber? What do you mean? Right? Apparently we do, right? But so lo matzinu truma mechuber l'karka. So the answer is like this: if you have shiboilus, marcha b'kri, as we said, you have some stalks in which it was put into a pile, right? So let's find it. Right, Shibaya Shemarcha Bakri, the Shasla, and then you replant it. Vikarla Shem B'Mechuber, and it's considered to be truma even while it is mechuber. So how could we say that there's no such thing? Well, Masina Truma Mechuber Karka. It means we don't find it regarding to be chayiv, the one who eats it chayiv misa or chaimish. Says Rashi, the eat gachin v'achol batal daitai. The fact is, if you would bend down and eat it, even though you ate it, and it's iser, it's a chayiv misa for eating truma. Nonetheless, if it's attached, you're not going to be chayiv misa because it's not normal, right? It's even if you would eat it that way, if you're tolish and ate it, so it's tolish. So we're not talking about a case where it's only mechuber. But if you bend down and eat it, batal daitzel it's a koladam. So therefore, that's not considered to be an achila to be chayiv misa. Okay. TB 22. Heichem shkachas la truma mechuber. Okay, so I wrote im marviach lo kara leha shem olav. That's not exactly what means. You're right. You make it into a pile, and then mahadar. So you replant it, and we said the Inyan misa ba'achila. The chaimish. Okay, that's Ayin and Aleph. TB 22. TB 22. Okay. Let's keep moving. Let's see the next Mishnah. Hachitin v'asairin v'koismin v'habshibaylis shoyol v'hashipoin hari'elu chayavim b'chal. So these are the 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, oats, and rye. So all these are chayiv in challah. Mistarf and zemzeh. The mistarf, as the Gemara is going to explain what that means. V'asurin b'chadash. There's an iser chadash. You can't eat them until, as we've been speaking about throughout this whole parak, until on the second day of Pesach, you bring the Omer, until Mizrach HaShemesh, the sun rises, the whole day, Ad V'ad Machal, Bet Tzemah Yom Hazeh. Okay. Milifnei, so that's that. V'asurim b'chadash. Milifnei HaPesach, Maliksor, and before Pesach, you're not allowed to harvest. Milifnei Omer, so it's Asr Chodesh before Pesach. You cannot harvest it before the Omer is brought. And then Im Hashrishu Kaidam Omer HaOmer Matiru. So if it gave root, so then that's already that year's grain, and therefore the Omer on Pesach will matter. On the other hand, if let's say you have to wait, let's say it's not rooted yet, and then Pesach comes, and then it's rooted a few weeks later, so then you have to wait the entire year. It's still considered to be Yashan. The only time the Chadash is matter is dafk if it's grain that's already rooted into the ground. Tana kaismin min chitin. So kaismin, which is a spelt, is a type of wheat. Shiboya shayel v'shipoin, when it comes to oats and rye, that's min sa'arin. That's like a connected to barley. So kaismin, when we say kaismin, which as we translate is spelt, as we continue to ayin mid base, is gulba, which, as we said, is spelt. Shipoin is yishra, which, as we said, shipoin is rye. And then lastly, shiboilis shoyel shiboi tala. It almost looks like some type of tail, and this is of a fox. So shiboilis shoyel is oats. Okay, so he's just redefining what these 5 grains actually are. Now, hani in oris hadoichin lo, as we saw in the 6th parak in brachos, it's only these 5 grains, excluding millet and rice. Which also discussed, I think, on Daf Mem Imsachim, that loy. So they don't fall into this category of an Isser Chadash, and they're not mitzvah for one another, and they're not Chayv and Chala. Okay. So the question is, Menhanimili, why only these 5 grains? We have this famous sugya, Amr Shlokish Asi Lechem Mimatzah. So it's Gzer Shava. Ksiv Hacha, B'hayabal Chachem Lechem Aretz, eat from the bread of the land of Ksiv Hasem, Lechem Oini, poor man's bread. V'hasem Gufam Adol, so Amr Shlokish, V'chein Tana Rebbe Shmuel, V'chein Tana Rebbe Eliezer, and Yaakov Aymer Kro, the Pasuk says, Loisach Alav Chametz, and not to eat Chametz, Shivash Yomim Toichel Matzahs. Rather, you have to eat matzah. Lechem Oini, fine. So Devarim Ha, Boyim with Yichimutz, Adam Yotze Behem Yidei Chavasam B'Pesach. Interesting. What are you allowed to have on? What are you allowed to eat on Pesach? Only matzah, because it's shaykh to become chametz. Yotzu elu, rice and millet, shein behen lidei chimutz el lidei sirchain. Basically, just spoils. So it doesn't actually become chametz. So therefore, since it's not shaykh to become chametz, so it's not shaykh to become matzah, to be matzah. Mastarvin zemzeh. So Tana hatavua. The grains, vakamachim and flours, vabitzikois, and the dough, mitzdarfim zemzeh, they're all mitzdarf one to another. Now the Gemara asks, so my hilchasa, so I'm a Rav Gahana Inyan Chadash. This is going to be question 12. Hatvua v'kamachim vabitzikois, mitzdarfim zemzeh. So what are the halachas? So there's going to be actually 4 answers to this question, and the first one is Inyan Chadash. That we say that all these different things are mitzdaref to equal the shear regarding Isser Achila of of Chadash. Omer Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef Omer Indian Chametz Pesach. So it's mitzdarif to a kazayas, you're going to be Chaim Kares. Rav Papa Omer Indian Meiser Sheni. The Achale Chutzul Chayma Lucky. Person's going to get Malchus if he ends up eating Meiser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim's walls. Rav Omer Indian Tumas Oichlin. He says it's actually Indian Tumas Oichlin. So when it comes to Tumas Oichlin, it's mistarif. V'akamashmon the tavu of a kamachim diumad b'tzeikos. They're comparable to the dough. Mahasam oichlin be'ena avhachanami uchl be'ene. It's like a food which is basically right there and ready. V'san yechita. So that's the dip. Now we learn chita bein kalufa, bein she'enu kalufa. Whether it's peeled or not peeled, mitzdarefes, which means even if it's not peeled, it's still mitzdaref. So ayira kalufa mitzdarefes. However, when it comes to barley, only if it's peeled is a mitzdaref. She'enu kalufa and mitzdarefes. Eini v'ha tana b'Rabbi Shmuel. The pasuk says, "I'll call zera zurashi zareya kaderech shebeni adam moitzin lozriya," like the normal way a person plants. Chita, with regard to wheat, b'chli pasa, while it's still in its shell, was sorry b'chli pasa, v'adash b'chli pasa. So kasha, chabalachais havyaveshais. So what's the difference between peeled or not peeled? So if the peel is dry, says Rashi, then lo havi shemer, it's not like a shemer to the pre. Delamifrachi benafli, it's going to crumble and then fall apart. And for the fact that it's shelled, doesn't do anything. However, if it's lach, then it is mitzdaref because it's considered to be a shemer peri. Okay, so again, that's question 12. So question 12 again asks question 11. Elu arba surin o mitzvahs einim nohagos elo b'chamishas minim dagan. So we kind of did this already. So we said with regard to, I'm sorry, let's look at question 12. I think it's out of order. Question 12. So right, so these different things are mitzdaref. Hatvua v'kamachim v'batzeikos. So Rav Kahana says l'inyan chadash. Rav Yosef says l'inyan chamza pesach. Rav Papa says l'inyan meiser sheni. If you eat meiser sheni outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, you get malchus. And Rabbi says l'inyan tumas oichlin. Okay, let's keep moving. Then we'll see question 11 afterwards. V'yasurin b'chadash milifnei hapesach. Right, o mifnei ha'omer. So Menahanimili Yomeresh Lakish Asi Lechem Lechem Matzah. So again, we went out this Gzer Shava from Matzah, which is on Pesach. And so too, when it comes to, says Rashi, Ma Matzah Chamishas Minim, right? Matzah is the 5 minim only. V'loi Oyers V'daichen Av Chadash Nami. Right? So too when it comes to Chadash, it's the same thing. Okay. Liksor lifnei hapesach, so it's different. So you harvest it lifnei oimer lifnei hapesach. So minanimil Rav Yochanan as reishis machala. So it's a gzer shav. So my koidim will oimer. So Rav Yona omer koidim katsiras oimer. That the prohibition is it cannot be harvested. What does it mean? Ma koidem oimer. It means before the katsiras oimer. Rav Yosi bar zavda oimer koidem havas oimer, before actually bringing it, not the harvesting but the bringing. Tanan asurin b'chadash. There's different gears over here. Lifnei oimer. So you're not allowed to eat chadash before the omer is brought. V'liktsor, but harvesting it lifnei hapesach. Now bishalman yemer koidem havas oimer. That's why they're not together. But they should be combined. If let's say it rooted before the oimer, then oimer is matirin. My koidem oimer. On this, Rav Yoina oimer koidem havas oimer. Rav Yosef bar zabda oimer koidem katsiras oimer. So the machlokas is when does it have to be rooted so that the omer is a matir? Is it from the time that it was actually brought, or is it even before that by the Katsiras Omer that already had to have been rooted? Obviously, the Nafgamina would be between the Katsiras Omer and Havas Omer. Would we say it's a matter for that year, or do you have to wait a following year? Okay, we're going to stop there. So now let's look at question 11. Elu arba isurin o mitzvos enu nahagos el b'chamishas midi dagan. So obviously we know matzah and chametz, right? Those are pretty straightforward and obvious, right? We know that. But in addition to that, we have challah and chadash, right? As we just saw over here, the din of chadash is specific that it's obviously directly linked to the 5 minim, as well as that there's an Isser Chadash before that, and also the Chiyuv Challah, which we saw already in the Mishnah, right? That Challah is Dafka there too. Okay, all right. So that's question 11. So that basically ends it. Let's just see if there's another question here. Kaitzel Shachas, no question. TB 23. Adkan.